In the year 1991, the global dynamic again changed in a dramatic fashion, once the Soviet Union was erased from the international scene. The forces of international balance once again found themselves in readjustment. The last 3 decades of our history have cycled around in a new unipolar system that was constructed as a result. Unipolarism is the concentration of power in one single polar, the United States of America. Many European countries no longer aspire to continue themselves as superpowers on account of demographic, economic, and territorial restrictions. The joint countries of the European Union, however, offers a formidable economic, military, and cultural power that is practically part for part with the superpower. These types of alliances are known as transnational organizations. Such measures together are known as neoliberalism, a political stance that seeks to reaffirm the above stated principles in order to achieve economic growth in agreement with the standards and demands of the 20th century. Mexico began this process with the presidency of Carlos Salinas de Gortari, 1988 to 1994. Trade blocs and the interdependent economies, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. These institutions have since then been major players in the management of international capital, administration, and financial loans on the government projects all around the world. Interdependence is a principle under which nations depend on each other economic, political, and cultural terms. Demographic phenomena, transculturation, and terrorism. Overpopulation led to a series of complications for governments. Providing basic services for growing urban population became a titanic task. Also, education on a universal level and the offering of job opportunities have become an increasingly difficult dynamic to cover as the population continues to increase. Currently, the world population exceeds more than 7 billion inhabitants and continues growing. Another phenomenon of great transcendence that has marked the last few years in history is the growth of religious radicalism and terrorism. Since the invention of the television and the telephone, the world has traveled through a process of unprecedented technological advances. The continual development of the Internet has also marked a profound change in education on labor and personal level, becoming a monumental platform for converting information of any type. One of the most important events of the last decade was September 9 of 2001, commonly called 9/11. Al-Qaeda hijacked two jetliners crashed in the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York. This is also known as the worst terrorist attack against the U.S. because more than 3,000 people died in this event and it was the world spotlight for a lot of time. It caused immediately hate toward the Middle East. This made the U.S. to take extreme measures in all the airports and borders and with the immigrants for that time. March 20 to March 1st of 2003, the invasion of Iraq. It was led by the United States alongside with the United Kingdom and smaller contingents from other countries. The reason for the invasion, according to the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, were to disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction, to end Saddam Hussein's support for terrorism, and to free the Iraqi people. 11 March of 2004, the Madrid train bombings were a series of coordinated bombings against the commuter train system of Madrid. It killed 199 people and wounding over 108,000 people. The official investigation by the Spanish government determined the attacks were inspired by Al-Qaeda. Though there were no direct participation of Al-Qaeda, there were nationwide demonstrations and protests following the attacks in the months that followed the attack. July 7 of 2005, suicide bombs in London. It was a series of coordinated suicide attacks on London public transport system during the morning rush hour. These bombings were carried by the British Muslim men. 3 of them were Pakistan and 1 Jamaican descendant. At 8:50 a.m., 3 bombs exploded within 50 seconds of difference between each other on 3 London Underground trains. With this explosion, 56 people were killed, including the bombers, and around 700 were injured. August 29 of 2005, Hurricane Katrina. It was the costliest and deadliest hurricane in the history of the United States. In the recorded Atlantic hurricanes, it was 6th stronger overall. Caused catastrophic damage in Mississippi and Louisiana in the United States. The 80% of the New Orleans flooded. At least 1,836 people lost their lives in the actual hurricane and subsequent floods. Years later, thousands of displaced residents in Mississippi and Louisiana were still living in trailers. 2009, Barack Obama is elected as the President of the USA. He became the first African American to be President in the USA. His immediate actions were focused on the financial crisis plaguing the country. He subsequently introduced several economic stimulus packages, with billions upon billions of dollars being spent in an effort to reinvigorate the financial system and free up credit. He also began several rigorous reforms to the social infrastructure of U.S. Obama began to pull troops of Iraq between 2009 and 2010 while transitioning those who remained from combat roles to the counter-terrorists and the training of Iraqi security forces. May 2nd of 2011, death of Osama bin Laden, the founder and head of the Islamist militant group Al-Qaeda, was killed in Pakistan by United States Navy SEALs of the U.S. The operation was carried out by the CIA, and the U.S. forces took bin Laden's body to Afghanistan for identification, waited 24 hours of his death in accordance with Islamic tradition, and then buried him at sea. August of 2012, Palestine and UN. Palestine was finally accepted as an observer state in the General Assembly of the UN after 4 failed attempts. The votation consisted of 137 countries in favor, 41 abstentions, and 9 against the motion. With this, Palestine will have access to international organizations such as the UNESCO. Palestine is still fighting to be recognized as a state with voice and vote in the assembly. Globalization is a process that embodies a transformation into spatial organization of social relations and transactions, generating transcontinental or interregional flows and networks of activity, interaction, and power, and it is characterized by 4 types of change. Globalization can be thought of as the widening, intensifying, speeding up, and growing impact of the worldwide interconnectedness. With this become possible to map patterns of worldwide links and relations across all key domains of the human activity, from the military to the cultural. Terrorism is any act designed to cause terror. It has been described as both tactic and strategy. A crime and wholly duty series of acts. It can also be used to reach the political objective. It has been practiced nationalist groups, religious groups, revolutionaries, and ruling governments. The symbolism of terrorism is exploit human fears to help to achieve their goals. Unipolar world. A unipolar world has one hegemonic and dominating state that holds a significant amount of power economically, militarily, and politically. Digital era. The digital era can be seen as development of the evolutionary system in which knowledge turnover is not only very high, but also increasingly out of the control of humans, making it a time in which our lives become more difficult to manage. It is characterized by technology which increases the speed and breadth of the knowledge turnover of the economy and society. Why did globalization emerge? I think globalization is an essential element of the economic history of mankind. I think it's very important because it is a process which embodies a transformation in the spatial organization of social relations and transactions, generating transcontinental or interregional flows and networks of activity, interaction, and power. It involves a stretching of social, political, and economic activities across political frontier regions and continents. At the end of the Cold War, the world started to be unipolarism. This is why globalization is important for us, because it's the evolution of the worldwide system of transport and communication increases in the velocity of diffusion of ideas, goods, information, capital, and people. In most cases, what caused terrorist attacks in the 20th century? I think there are 2 causes of the terrorism attacks. One is the social and political injustice. People choose terrorism when they are trying to right what they perceive to be a social or political or historical wrong, when they have been stripped of their land or rights, or denied this. And the other one is the belief that violent means justify the end. Many terrorists in history say sincerely that they choose violence after long deliberation because they felt they had no choice. Also, another facts like poverty and anger, religion, revenge, etc. It's a lot of facts. How does the end of the Cold War relate with the unipolar world? In the Cold War, there was the bipolar world. It means that Russia and the United States were the big superpowers in the world. Now, the unipolarism, it is that we have one superpower in the world, that is the United States. It is also used to describe the power structure when one superpower dominates alone. The end of the Cold War meant that the previous decade's superpower rivalry now had ended. There was no longer the traditional East versus West conflict, at least not the way it had been earlier in the 20th century. The United States surfaced as the sole dominating power in the world politics, as there were no real challengers to their hegemonic position. This allowed greater room for the superpower to maneuver and to get involved in international issues that not necessarily coincided with the national interest. How has the digital era influenced today's society? The digital era is now super important for our lives because everything we do, it's like on the internet, on telephone, computer, electricity, etc. Our society is a lot influenced on this era because things like the newspaper, the information, shows, novels are in the internet and in the television. Kranzberg, he argues that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral.